The President of the United States, standing at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, watching workers paint the basin, while being told his Navy just exchanged fire with Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Missiles fired, drones launched, American destroyers targeted, Iranian ports struck. And Trump looks at the cameras and says, "They trifled with us today. We blew them away." A trifle. He also called it a love tap. That was yesterday. And here is the part that is going to break your brain simultaneously. Axios is reporting the White House believes it is getting close to a one-page memorandum of understanding to end the war entirely. Rubio is in Rome this morning saying he expects Iran's response today. And Trump, standing at that reflecting pool, said a deal could happen any day, the same day. Missiles fired at 3 US destroyers, ports bombed in Iran, a love tap, a trifle, and a deal any day. I genuinely do not know how to explain the cognitive dissonance of what is happening in this strait right now. But I am going to try. This is the Hormuz Files, day 69. And nothing about today makes sense until you understand what is actually going on underneath it. Let me walk you through yesterday in exact sequence, because the speed and the contradictions are important. 3 US Navy guided missile destroyers, the USS Truxtun, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS Mason, were transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian forces launched multiple missiles, drones, and small boats against the 3 destroyers. US Central Command responded with what it called self-defense strikes on Iranian military facilities, targeting missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence nodes at Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas, and Bandar. CENTCOM was specific and important about one detail. No US assets were struck. Every Iranian missile knocked down. Every drone intercepted. The people who fired them, Trump said, are no longer with us. Iran's IRGC told a completely different story. The statement you saw in the screenshots, claiming a large-scale and precise combined operation was carried out, claiming significant damage to the American enemy, and claiming 3 invading enemy warships quickly fled the Strait of Hormuz area. America says no assets were struck. Iran says 3 warships fled damaged. One of those accounts is completely false. And here is the detail from Jennifer Griffin's reporting that explains everything about why this happened and why it happened now. The strike on Iranian ports came 2 days after Iran fired 15 ballistic and cruise missiles at UAE Fujairah port. That attack elicited fury from Gulf countries because top Pentagon leaders had said on Tuesday that the Iranian strikes did not rise to the level of breaking the ceasefire. They called them low-level attacks. And Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, listening to America downplay missiles being fired at their neighborhood, were furious. They abruptly halted permission for the US to use their bases and airspace for Project Freedom. Think about what that means. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, America's closest Gulf allies, pulled their support from the US operation because America wouldn't acknowledge that Iranian missiles hitting the UAE were a serious attack. The Pentagon called it low level. Riyadh called it an act of war against their region. And they closed their airspace. Permission has since been restored, but the damage to the alliance and what it reveals about how differently Washington and its Gulf partners are experiencing this war is significant and deeply underreported. Now let me talk about the thing that makes yesterday the most confusing day of this entire war. Because while missiles were flying and ports were burning, Axios journalist Barak Ravid published a scoop that has the entire diplomatic world on edge. The White House believes it is getting close to an agreement with Iran on a one-page memorandum of understanding to end the war and set a framework for more detailed nuclear negotiations. 1 page. to end a 69-day war that has cost $25 billion, killed nearly 3,500 Iranians, killed 32 Americans, closed the world's most important energy corridor, triggered a global economic shock, and brought oil to $126 a barrel. One page. And this morning, Rubio is in Rome. He told reporters that he expects Iran's response today. We should know something today. The hope is it's something that can put us into a serious process of negotiation. We're expecting a response from them at some point. Their system is still highly fractured and a bit dysfunctional, so that may be serving as an impediment. Fractured and dysfunctional. That is the Secretary of State describing the government he is trying to negotiate a peace deal with. On the same day, missiles were fired and ports were bombed. And Trump, when told about the one-page deal, corrected the reporting. He said, "The proposal between the two countries is more than a one-page offer." More than one page. Rubio said one page. Trump said more than one page. The White House said one page, all on the same day. Meanwhile, Iranian state TV is running a counter-narrative that is worth understanding. IRIB claimed Axios reported 5 times in 19 days that a deal was imminent, and 5 times no deal materialized. They called it a lie. They called Barak Ravid a regime collaborator profiting from market volatility. Barak Ravid, one of the most sourced and credible diplomatic journalists in Washington, immediately responded, calling it a regime propaganda campaign. This is the information war running alongside the shooting war. And understanding which narrative is true is the difference between knowing whether a deal is days away or months away. I want to spend a moment on Trump's language yesterday because I think it reveals something very specific about the strategy, or the lack of one, at the highest levels of this conflict. A trifle, a love tap. We blew them away. 3 US destroyers were targeted with missiles and drones in an active military engagement. CENTCOM launched strikes on 3 Iranian port facilities. Iranian military personnel were killed. And Trump called it a love tap while inspecting paint at the Lincoln Memorial. This is not just casual language. This is a deliberate, strategic choice. The same choice Trump made when he downplayed the Tuska seizure, when he called each of his 12 victory declarations a reasonable assessment of progress. Trump is managing 2 audiences simultaneously. His domestic American audience, who he needs to believe the war is under control and a deal is close, so gas prices stop costing him Republican votes. And the Iranian negotiating team, who he needs to believe the military pressure is escalating, so they sign the deal before the next strike. The problem is, those 2 messages are completely contradictory. Telling America it was a love tap tells Iran the US does not want to escalate. And telling Iran it will see one big glow tells America the president is not in control of the situation. Trump said that too, yesterday. They should not have done that today. Without a ceasefire, there's going to be one big glow coming out of Iran. One big glow. On the same day, he called it a love tap and a trifle. Our experts have been tracking this pattern from day one. Professor Mearsheimer called the war irrational, built on a theory of victory that was never coherent. Scott Ritter said the regime change operation failed on day 3. George Galloway has been asking since the beginning why Iran would negotiate with a country that cannot decide whether it is fighting a war or describing a trifle. And yesterday, the answer to Galloway's question was on full display at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Let me pull back for a moment, because I think there are 3 things happening simultaneously that mainstream media is not connecting, and the Hormuz files is going to connect them right now. First, the military picture. America struck 3 Iranian port facilities in self-defense after 3 destroyers were targeted. No US assets were hit. Iran claims otherwise. The ceasefire, technically, is still in effect. Both sides are firing at each other and calling it not a war. This is the most dangerous kind of conflict, one where both sides are actively engaged, but neither will acknowledge the engagement for fear of the political consequences of admitting the ceasefire is dead. Second, the diplomatic picture. A one-page deal is supposedly close. Rubio expects an Iranian response today. Trump says a deal could happen any day. But Iran's government remains fractured. The new supreme leader has not been seen or heard publicly. And Iranian state TV is running a propaganda campaign claiming the deal narrative itself is false. And the nuclear issue, the thing that broke Islamabad, the thing that Trump has called his absolute red line, remains unresolved in any proposed framework. Third, the alliance picture. And this one is the most important and the least covered. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait pulled their airspace permission because America downplayed missiles hitting the UAE. They restored it, but the signal that sent is permanent. The Gulf states are watching America manage this conflict with one eye on domestic politics and one eye on Iran. And they are learning that American protection has limits. Professor Pape said Iran is emerging as a fourth center of global power. And every time the Pentagon calls a missile attack on the UAE low level, more Gulf states privately begin calculating whether they should be hedging their bets toward Tehran. Here is where I stand on day 69. The ceasefire is technically in effect and practically meaningless. Both sides are firing at each other and calling it self-defense. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait pulled their support and then restored it, but the fracture in the alliance is real. A one-page deal may or may not be close, depending on whether you believe Axios, Trump, Rubio, or Iranian state television. The nuclear question remains unresolved, and Trump is simultaneously calling yesterday's engagement a love tap and warning of one big glow. The Hormuz Files has been tracking this war since day one. And here is what I believe, based on everything our panel has said, everything the evidence shows, and everything the last 69 days have demonstrated. Both sides need this deal more than they need to be right. Trump needs it before November midterms. Iran needs it before its fractured government loses whatever coherence it has left. And the one-page framework, whatever is actually on it, is probably the best deal either side is going to get from a position this complicated. The question is whether a government that cannot agree internally on what to offer, led by a supreme leader who has not been seen in public since the war started, can produce a credible signature before the next missile makes a deal politically impossible on the American side. And the question on the American side is whether Trump, who has declared victory 12 times, called this war a love tap and threatened one big glow in the same afternoon, can produce a deal that his domestic audience accepts as something worth the $25 billion and 32 American lives it cost. I don't know the answer to either of those questions, but I think today, May 8th, 2026, we are closer to knowing than we have been at any point since February 28th. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this right now, because what happened yesterday is the most complicated single day of this entire war, and most people still don't understand what it means. And tell me in the comments, do you think the deal gets signed today, or does one big glow happen first? I'll see you in the next file.